This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.
Collison, Lindemann, Barnes, McDermott, Oliver, Harriman, Skinner, Pearson, Wolterstorff, Van Arendonk, Kennedy, Bourne, Funk, Newman, Hoiberg, Meyer, Beecham, Osborne, Settles, Edwards, DeVries, Bohannon, Gibbs, Page, Heinrich, LaFrance, Helmers, Worley, Bullard, Gatens, Veet, Cundiff, Corver, McCann, Thompson, Davis, Looking Bill, David, Nurse, Pemsel, Hilmer, Kreinbrink, Myers, Wenig, Hibma, Corver, Wheat, Gaines, McCowan, Bruner, Haluska, Horner, Murray. Today on the Moonlight Graham Show, we are talking about the very best Iowa boys high school basketball teams to ever grace the hardwood here in the great state of Iowa. And so I brought Jack Brownlee, longtime Moonlighter, basketball historian, along with Sean O'Hare, another great Iowa basketball junkie, into the Moonlight Graham Show studio to ask the question, if we were to put together an 8-team basketball tournament, who would the 8 teams from the state of Iowa, going back to the start of history, start of basketball in the state of Iowa, what 8 teams would make that bracket? Okay, so what is our bracket? And also, how does that bracket play out? And ultimately, who is the best Iowa boys high school basketball team ever? I put this question out on Twitter last week, got a lot of responses. I think it boils down to 3 to 4 teams are definitely in the mix for the greatest team ever, but there's a lot to look at. It's really, really hard to compare eras, to compare classes, to compare different players at different points in their development. But that's the task that we took on with this podcast. Do we get it perfect? No. I'm sure we forgot a lot of teams. I'm sure I didn't give enough credit to the 1991 Ames team with Fred Hoiberg. I'm sure there's a Sioux City or a Waterloo or a Dubuque team that us Central Iowa guys just don't know enough about. But we do our best. We all did our own research before coming onto this podcast. I feel like we did a lot of teams justice, but then again, I never saw Chris Gaines from Waterloo play hoops. I never saw what that Waterloo team looked like or why they didn't win at all, why Carol Kemper and Nick Nurse and Brian David beat those guys. So we try to break down some of those legendary matchups that in a hypothetical world would exist, and we had a lot of fun doing it. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of debate that stems from this episode. And you know what? I'd love to hear every one of your opinions. Every one of them. That's why we created this podcast, to get conversations like this started. So without further ado, I got to thank our sponsor, People's Company, the best sponsor in the business. So thank you, People's Company. Check them out at peoplescompany.com. But here it is, the greatest Iowa high school basketball teams of all time. The greatest high school basketball teams, boys high school basketball teams in the state of Iowa's history. That is our task tonight here on the Moonlight Graham Show. I have got Moonlight Graham regular, Jack Brownlee. Jack, you're a day one guy. I think you were episode 3 or 4 of the podcast, and now you're doing episode 232. Welcome back to the pod.
Thank you. It's an honor.
And, you are an expert. You are a former state champion, have played in the state tournament, so your analysis here goes a long way, a lot farther than our other guest for tonight, who never played in the state tournament, but has made a brief appearance on the pod before. Sean O'Hare, Dowling Catholic graduate. Sean, who's the best Dowling team ever? Was it Bobby Hansen's year?
It would be Bobby Hansen, class of 79, would be number 1. Class of 2000, my year, I would have to say, is number 2.
Agree.
Is Bobby Hansen's year, the only state championship for Dowling boys?
Nope. They it's the most recent one, which is sad. That was 79, but they won one other time in the 50s.
Okay. All right. So
I don't remember which year.
Our task today is to pick, if we were to put together a tournament, a state tournament of the greatest Iowa boys high school basketball teams ever, what would those 8 teams, what would that bracket look like? So what we've done is we've all put together our bracket independently. And so we're gonna tell some stories of the state basketball tournament. And as you look back at it, I think one of the things that sticks out to me as I'm digging through the Iowa high school archives today is that basketball is a statewide sport. It's truly a sport that has touched almost every town in the state of Iowa, whether it's girls basketball through 6-on-6 or boys basketball through the years. You see every inch of the state represented in the archives. Like you see Sioux City, Hall Western Christian, Boyden Hall Rock, Northwest Iowa, Fort Dodge, Palmer, Pomeroy Palmer. You go down to Southwest Iowa and you get some really good Council Bluffs, St. Albert's teams. At one time, they won over 50 in a row. You get Harlan. Harlan, ever since Mitch Osborne went there after leaving Elkhorn Kimballton, and then he went up to Pomeroy Palmer and started a dynasty there. Then he goes to Harlan, and Mitch Osborne's the greatest high school basketball coach in the state of Iowa's history, and the guy's still coaching. Like, he's still in his 60s. Looks great. Then you move into Central Iowa, and it's Fred Hoiberg at Ames, Harrison Barnes, Doug McDermott, the Des Moines teams. You've had Hurl Beecham and Des Moines North, took the Des Moines North Polar Bears to the state tournament. Some great Des Moines Hoover teams. And even down south, you have Joe Wieskamp. You have some good teams out of Ottumwa. Gary Thompson, the Rollin' Rocket. Move up to Northeast Iowa, Cedar Falls, A.J. Green, Logan Wolf. They had some great teams here. Waterloo East, Waterloo West, Dubuque, Linn-Mar. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Winfield Mount Union with Clay Edwards and Jess Settles. It's remarkable. Iowa City High, Iowa City West. It's remarkable that every part of the state has had great basketball. We haven't even mentioned like Pella Christian. The Dutch can hoop. I think everybody knows that. Paulina, South O'Brien. It's incredible that as you look through these names, that it's not just, if you look at football nowadays, football is Dowling, Ankeny, Southeast Polk, but basketball is truly a statewide sport. And that's what I love about the game of basketball. So guys, as you were putting together your list, what was the most challenging part of this for you? Jack, you want to start it?
For me, it was eras, kind of style of basketball changes over the years. And, I looked at skill set of the players, size and where they went to school, after playing high school, whether it's basketball or just other schools or other sports. But it's tricky because the game of basketball just changes, and what you want to put on the floor changes throughout the years. And so that was a tricky part for me.
Sean?
For me, I was so married to my era. I'm a product of like the late 90s and graduated in 2000, Jack as well. So I remember growing up and seeing the teams in like the early to mid 90s with my older brothers. So I couldn't get my head outside of like the 90s. So I had to try to, dig into the archives a little bit to think outside the box or outside of my era. And then also too, thinking about the competition. I remember the teams that I enjoyed watching. I remember the players that I enjoyed. I couldn't always remember what the competition was like for, that entire class or for that state tournament.
And another thing, sometimes growing up when we watch, it's tricky. Are we fans of certain players because we're little? You know what I mean? And they're much better than, maybe not as good as we thought they were. And then we're old. Now we're old guys looking at, teams from the 2015. Are they as good? Or are we just kind of get off my lawn type guys? So that's the tricky part too, because like Sean said, I grew up going to the state tournament and being truly fans of a lot of these guys, thinking they're heroes of mine. And so that's tricky to separate that.
Yeah, as you look at the state tournament through the years, as I'm putting together my bracket, the first place I started was, let me look at all of the state champions throughout the state's history. But that gets tough because you forget about the competition that they ran up against. Some years are tougher years in the state based on the talent pool, and some years are easier. Like I was looking at Waterloo West, for instance, in the mid-'80s, and you had Chris Gaines and Terry Woods and some unbelievable talent coming out of Waterloo, and they got beat by Nick Nurse and Kemper. They didn't even win it. Chris Gaines' senior year, he was Mr. Basketball. So do you put them in your bracket if they didn't even win it? Or do you put Kemper in, who beat them? So obviously they must be better if they beat them head-to-head. So those type of questions were really tough. And then also, I wanted to find a home for the smaller schools as well. Like you have some of these small schools that won 50 in a row, and you're like, well, does the small school that won 50 in a row, has a nucleus of guys that have been playing together since second grade, have hardly lost in their lives. They know how to win. They know how to work together as a team. Could that squad go up against like a Kirk Heinrich Sioux City West team who probably has more talent but went 22-3 in 1999? Like those type of questions are so much fun, and I guess that's why we want to do the podcast, because it's really fun to talk about. So the teams that I was looking at that I guess made the cut for me before I get to my bracket, here are the teams that I considered with my bracket. All right, so this is a long list here. If you're not from the state of Iowa, you might as well just tune out right now because this is going to get pretty specific. But here's where I started with, and I'll get to my bracket later. So I started with, of course, Ames High School, 2008 through 2010, Iowa Falls with Collison and Lindemann, Mason City, 96-97. You had Dean Oliver on that team. The Palmer teams that won 103 in a row. I had, you looked at some of those Pella teams with the Corver brothers, Pierce Hibma, Winfield Mount Union, Jess Settles and Clay Edwards there. Fort Dodge, 1988, had 3 D1 guys on that team. All the great Linmar teams with the Bohannon brothers, Marcus Page. Waukee recently had a really good squad. Sioux City West in 1999. Sioux City East in 2003 was tough. Iowa City West had a good run from like 2011 through 2013. You also had, Waterloo East in 90, Waterloo East from 02-04, Iowa City High in 08 with Matt Gatens. Johnston had a really good run with Sunblad and Danner. They won 58 in a row in 94-95. Kemper in 85 with Mr. Basketball, Brian David and Nick Nurse. Des Moines North with Hurl Beecham. You also had Storm Lake, 1968, the Kennedy brothers, 6'11", 6'9". They ran the table back when there was only one class, Jack.
Twin Towers.
Ames in 76 had a good squad. Iowa City Regina, 78, 79. Hall Western Christian, basically every other year Hall Western Christian's got a good squad, but 91 was the team I was looking at. Applington, 91-92, won 75 in a row. Western Dubuque, 2001. Pomeroy Palmer, 02-03. Northland, 2018. Jake Hilmer, Austin Hilmer on that squad. Garner Hayfield in 02. Paulina won 80 in a row with Neil Fegabank. He was one of my favorites. The Roland Rocket, Gary Thompson, he went up against Davenport, and actually Davenport won that in the state finals back in the day. And then you had Harlan, of course, 06-07. Harlan, another good team in 04, but I think 06-07 was probably their best run there. And then Hoover in 98, Des Moines Hoover in 1998.
Finally, you got to them.
So, guys, that was my – I'm sure I missed somebody. We have a listener out there that's saying, hey, how is Danville and Jake Wenig not on that team? They won back-to-back.
Tweet Tim at Moon Graham Show.
Yeah. How is that Tipton team from the early 2000s not on there? But that was my list, okay? That was the list that I put together of teams that I was looking at. How did you guys – where'd you start? Sean, where'd you start?
So you covered a lot of them there, which were a lot of the highlights. For me, it kind of started and stopped with that Ames team. I came in thinking 2010 and was quickly reminded that 2009 was probably the better team with Boo Boo.
We'll get it. Debatable.
That's a debate, but they had Boo Boo, and then they also had, I think, another Pritchard, maybe it was, that went to Yale. So there were 4 D1 guys. One team that you didn't mention in the 48 that you just rattled off is Oskaloosa from, was it 19? That had Xavier Foster and Cole Henry, 2 big-time D1 guys. They won the state title. Xavier Foster is going to go down as one of the best high school basketball players, I think, in the state of Iowa, at least nationally ranked-wise.
Good point.
So that was a team that you didn't mention. So it started with Ames, and then I focused again a lot on like the Metro. So you mentioned Des Moines Hoover there at the end, which that was a team that I played against and grew up watching. But Dave Newman was an absolute stud in high school. He was like a just a little bit below a Kirk Heinrich, but he was a few inches smaller, and I think that's what held him back from going and being a big-time D1, but he still went to Northwestern and started his freshman year before he got injured, and they had TJ Welton, who ended up playing at Drake, and Greg Danielson at Drake, so that was in my top of the list. And then another team that you didn't mention that I remember watching is a really good Ankeny team back in 1995 with the Ryan Sears, who played at Creighton. Probably not a top 8, but they were kind of in my mix. And then I'll one more team, then I'll turn it over to you, Jack. But Valley had a really good team in 1999 with guys like Tim McCullough, who we know well.
Great point guard. Floor leader.
Couldn't shoot a lick, but a great floor leader and distributor to Casey Shelton and to Jesse Harris. They lost to Sioux City West in the finals, but that was just Luke Jacobson, who was just an absolute scorer. That was a great team as well. So,
well, speaking of that, I guess I didn't mention. Well, maybe I did with Sioux City East. Ben Jacobson.
Oh yeah.
Too. I forgot about him. I think I'm not sure exactly who was on that 03 team. I don't think
02.
Yeah, it would have been Jacobson in 02 maybe. You're right about Xavier Foster. I forgot about that. And in that vein, maybe Bowen Bourne's Norwalk team. Maybe I'm not giving them enough credit of how good they were, just recency, non-bias, or whatever the opposite of bias is.
Yeah, it was tough to kind of drill down, but it was a ton of fun going through the list of potential teams.
Yeah, what I did, I just I sat down and wrote about 12 to 14 teams that just off the top of my head that I remembered watching and thinking these are top teams. One team, like Sean said, that I didn't really think about, and then you started rattling off those teams that popped in my head was Dubuque Wahlert.
With Pemsel?
Pemsel. I think they won it like 3 years in a row. Did you mention them?
I did not.
And they had
a guard too. Who's the guy the white guy that went to Iowa?
Yeah. I don't remember.
Good looking guy. Had some
transferred to. He played at UC Irvine or something last year.
Did they ever do anything with Eggers there or not?
They beat.
They were in the tournament.
They were in the tournament. They went deep. They beat Mason City and Jeff Horner one year.
But the years with Pemsel were better years.
Yeah, they won. Yeah. I think they won the title 3 years in a row.
Okay,
with Pemsel.
Well, the other one I didn't mention too was Valley with Matt Bullard and Mike Bourne in like '84. They didn't win it, and so it's hard when you're only looking at the winners because somebody. Maybe Bullard sprained his ankle and went out in the first quarter of that game, and that's why they didn't win it. Like, 'cause Bullard played 14 years in the league, and Mike Bourne was just but you never know. So, I think actually I had Mike Bourne on the pod. Now that I think about it, he mentions that the game that still nags at him is losing in the state finals.
Shout out to.
You have that up.
So for me, when I was looking at my top 8, I was debating on now, do all 8 teams should they have won the state title? And my initial reaction was yes, but I have a team in my top 8 that finished second that I think still, if we took every high school team to ever play in Iowa high school history and had a huge bracket, I think this team comes out in the top 8. That's Waterloo East in 02.
With a sophomore Carlton Reed, Mike Henderson,
Freyshawn McGee, 6'6", wing that played at Cleveland State.
Was Mike Henderson the quickest guard with the ball in his hand? Maybe
that team was
outside of the North Central Conference.
That team was so quick. I remember Sean and I played on the same AAU team, and we played an 8th grade version of this Waterloo East 02 team. I think they finished 8th grade. We finished our sophomore year or junior year, and they kind of hung with us a little bit. They were just these quick little guards, and they kind of kept that same mentality throughout high school. But they had Carlton Reed played at Iowa, then UNI. Mike Henderson played at Iowa. Sean McGee, 6'6", played at Cleveland State. Mylon Moses, wide receiver at Iowa State. Another Travis Ferguson played at football at Iowa State. Jeremy Cook, who was really, really good player, but I don't think went anywhere after high school. But that team was unlike any team I've ever seen, especially in Iowa. And I think if we had a full-out tournament, that the way and the style that those guys played would give a lot of these teams problems.
They did win it in 04. Henderson wasn't on that team, but that was Reed's senior year, and Reed was like the guy.
Mikey won it his senior year, though, 03.
Oh, did they win back-to-back then?
I don't know if they won. I thought Mikey won it his senior year.
Let me look that up real quick here. So Waterloo East, they won it in 90. And they won it in 74. They were runner-up in 02. They won it in 03. Oh, and then they were runner-up in 04. They lost to Linmar in 04. So they made the finals 3 years in a row. Yeah, really great team. And I think one of the challenges here as we look at rosters, and Sean, you mentioned it with Ames, you forget sometimes that like sophomore Carlton Reed isn't as good, not nearly as good as senior Carlton Reed. And junior Harrison Barnes, junior Doug McDermott is a lot different than senior Doug McDermott. Same thing with those Iowa Falls teams. And so when you're looking at the best Ames team, the best Waterloo East team, the best Iowa Falls team, it's tough because, guys take big leaps in high school. Like you can grow a couple of inches. You can put on 15 pounds. You can devote yourself to one sport and make a big leap. And I think that's a challenge. Mike Bourne and Matt Bullard, they lost to Burlington in 84, though. Just so you guys know that. So growing up, watching the state basketball tournament, I feel like we're all kind of basketball junkies. What are your first memories of watching the state basketball tournament in the state of Iowa?
For me, I didn't really watch it. I remember watching the 95 Johnson team on TV. I was thinking that was a big deal. They were undefeated back-to-back years, and I remember watching them on TV thinking these guys are really good. But my first experience at the state tournament where it changed my life was watching Dean Oliver play Cedar Rapids Kennedy first round of, I believe, his junior year. And that's when, for me, I was like, there's nothing more fun than playing in this. And that's kind of where my goals started, was watching Dean play in the state tournament.
Sean, you spent a lot of your life here in Des Moines, so I'm guessing you went to a lot of state tournaments as a kid.
Yeah. Well, so it's funny he mentions the Mason City Dean Oliver, because that was one of my first memories too. I have two older brothers. One of them, I believe, was the same. Did Dean graduate in 96?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in 96,
97.
So he was 97. So I remember going to the state tournament in 96 with my older brother Kevin. They played Dean in the first round in 96. And so that was the first time I saw Dean, and they had Brant Harriman and another 6'10" or 6'11" guy. I don't remember where he played. I think he played at Luther. Yeah. And I think they had another good guard. But anyway, seeing Dean, very similar to Jack, like seeing him for the first time, that high level of a guard was unbelievable. And then seeing him play against your brother was just kind of a cool experience, although that they beat Dowling by 15 or 20, pretty good. And then in that same tournament was Ricky Davis in North. And so that was the first time I had seen athleticism at like the high school level like that. So in that state tournament is like my kind of first real memories. Before that, I would go and stuff, or maybe watch some of it on TV. I remember that Johnston team as well. But being there at Vets in 96, Ricky Davis, like the game before, and then seeing Dean was like two of the...
And that West High team that had the Crest brothers.
Yeah.
I believe it was that year. Yeah, I remember. I watched it all on TV, like the semis and championship, and it was unbelievable. It felt like you're watching the NBA.
Well, 96 was the first time I went to Vets, too, because that was when the Gales went in 96 and had a first-round exit against, I think, Sloan Westwood, and it was just a terrible, terrible game for the Gales. But that was kind of my first memory, too, with Dean Oliver. And he was like, it felt like you were watching an NBA player. Like, he was a big, big deal, where, like, everybody in the state was tuning in to watch Dean Oliver, and Harriman like had the bald head. Like Harriman seemed like he was a 35-year-old NBA role player when he was like 17 years old. Yeah. And that was the team that I remember as well. But it's been fun to watch the state tournament over the years, because as you look through the archives, everybody who's anybody in basketball, their names in the archives here for the state tournament. And you've seen some really great performances, and the best of the best always seem to shine in that. And you remember, You remember Kirk Heinrich putting on a show. I remember Nate Funk for Sioux City Healing just hitting shot after shot to pull the Crusaders back into that game. Like guys like Kyle McCann, who went on to be a quarterback at the University of Iowa. Collison, Marcus Page. 1 year Marcus Page and Linmar had their backs against the wall, and he had to hit 2 threes in the last minute to win a game. And it's just been awesome to see the best players shine on the biggest stage, because we're not that big of a state. If you want to go to a game, you can go to a game there.
And you can sit pretty close. And I don't even remember the high school, but I remember watching Robbie Sieverding score 42 at the state tournament. I think it was Bellevue Marquette.
It was Bellevue Marquette.
And I just thought, and then I saw him for the first time play there, and I kind of followed his career at UNI, and wanted to kind of watch him a little bit closer because of I just became a fan of his, watching him score 40 in the tournament.
And growing up in Des Moines too, it was great because you've just alluded to it or mentioned it, that there was so much good basketball around the state of Iowa. And I was so lasered in on the CIML and the Metro, and that's all I saw until that 1 week in March where people came from all over. So even like Collison, going and seeing Collison for the first time and just seeing him, a man amongst boys, was incredible. And then everybody else just across the state that you would kind of hear about being a basketball guy, but the internet wasn't like a thing in the late 90s. And then you'd hear about them just through the AAU circuit or just people talking throughout the season, and then you'd wait for them to come to the state tournament, and you'd go down there and you'd park there for a day and just watch some of the best players.
That's what I always liked about playing at a 2A school, was you'd really lock into the 2A, 3A fields every year, because it was power, these small school powerhouses that would just be there every year. And so you got used to the Van Wykes from Pella and the Wolterstorffs from, Hull. And, and you would see Rock Valley and Boyden Hall and Paulina and Western Christian. And you'd see these same teams year in and year out, and it'd be the same last names all the time. And you really got a feel for this type of style that they played. The same coaches would show up year in and year out. And even though, in the grand scheme of things, as I'm putting my bracket together, I don't have as many 2A, 3A schools as I would like, just because of sheer talent. But I do love that about high school basketball in the state of Iowa, is that you have guys like Mitch Osborne, who, no matter what the makeup of Harlan's team is this year, they're going to win 70% of their games and have a shot at making the tournament. And I've always thought that was really – same with Pella Christian and Hull Western Christian. They're going to be there. Right. And Jack, we went to St. Ed's, and St. Ed's, we were that way for 20 years, from 96 to 2012, you could count on the Gales, being at the state tournament every other year, which was really fun to be a part of that, because your fan base gets used to going down there. And it's just, man, basketball is just a great game. It's just a great game.
Speaking of the Gales, so Jack's, we have to say it, Jack's 2000 run at the state tournament.
Yeah.
When you look at just individual performances, it's up there. I don't know the numbers, Jack. You know the numbers. Please tell me.
I don't think I do.
Yes, you do. But that was just an unbelievable run. When you talk about individual performances in a state tournament with a team that was really good, but it was a really good supporting cast. There wasn't really anybody else that stood out. I don't think. I mean, good players. Keegan was a good player. Coolman, Conley, guys, good team. But
right. Well, Jack had 36.
Right.
Without an overtime.
Right. That needs to be. Well,
noted. That was a Nate Funk type game. Nate Funk had a great game, and they lost. I had remembered that because he was so great that game. I remember that they won, and they actually got beat that game. And another one of those was Brandon Myers in 2004, and I was in that game. And Brandon Myers had
monster game, didn't he?
36 and 19 against us. He was unbelievable. And just games like that through the years are awesome to watch. I think I was looking at the stat book. Randy Kryenbrink from Paulina, he scored 113 points in 3 games in the state tournament. It's stat lines like that. Jack, who was the point guard from Assumption that we watched last year? Remember were you not there? Who was the point guard for Assumption? I should have looked this guy's name up. Point guard for Davenport Assumption, transferred in because he was from Illinois, but those COVID rules last year, he transferred to Davenport across the border, and they got beat, I think, in the first round or semifinals, and he had 36. He went down, committed to Texas. I can't remember his name, but that guy was just phenomenal. And Assumption had no business being at the state tournament, except for this guy was just a level above everybody else. Bowen Bourne. I remember watching Bowen Bourne a couple of years ago, and he was just electric. Mm-hmm. He just delivered. What other great performances?
Yeah, on my list, I remember, what I'm talking about is games I remember vividly watching. 1997 state championship, Sioux City West versus Mason City. Dean had 38. Sioux City West had a sophomore, Kirk Heinrich, which kind of burst onto the scene. I remember watching, thinking this guy's going to be really good. This sophomore, he's 6'3", defending, but Kyle Galloway went on to play at Iowa, scored 38. So those two matched each other, 38 in the state championship game. Dean won, but I remember thinking, I'm watching a high major college basketball game. There was just athletes and studs all over the floor. So that was a big influence on me as well. And then I think we mentioned Ryan Sears and David Newman. Sean and I are same age and both played point guard, so we kind of have similar tastes there. Those were guys that I watched, that I tried to kind of imitate their games a little bit when I would play.
In my off base, was Newman close to Heinrich in high school in terms of like skill level, like how I remember it, or was Heinrich light years?
No, I don't think so. I think Newman. Yeah, I agree. I think Newman.
I just
remember a healthy David Newman, nobody could keep, in front of.
Yeah, that's what I remember. Him coming down the floor like full steam ahead with like a crossover. He just was a little bit shorter than Heinrich. I think that held him back, but he was phenomenal.
And I think maybe you and I are at 5'11", and probably we looked at him thinking, hey, he was an influence for sure.
Yeah. I also just to that kind of vein too. Des Moines Christian, I was a big fan. Jack and I are buds with Sean Sonderlatter. We played, same AU team with him. So watching those teams in like 98 to 2000, but they had a really good point guard named John Moore, and then his brother was Josh Moore, but was just a stud. Those two guys were really good, and then Sean obviously was really good. Came into his own later a little bit, I think, but they had another guy named Adam Daly who played like big time. No, I shouldn't say big time, but they played D2 ball. And then Dustin Rand, who played D2 as well. That was an awesome team. Remember watching them as well.
See, I wonder, looking back, teams that what's the better team? A team that has a guy going to North Carolina or Kansas with role players, or a team that's got a bunch of Division II players on that team? Because that's the tricky part of deciding who would win. Because I kind of tend to go for a team that has the most talent, not necessarily the highest ceiling for one or two players. And like Des Moines, like you mentioned, Des Moines Christian's full of college basketball players. I think teams like that would go a long way in a tournament.
I always thought in the state of Iowa, without a shot clock, the great high school teams are one with two really good players and three guys that knew their role.
Yeah.
And being that there's not a shot clock, you don't end up with your bad players taking bad shots to try to beat the shot clock. And so what ends up happening is teams like that at the state tournament, the best players are always taking the shots. And you see it time and time again. So I would always argue that in Iowa high school basketball, the teams like with two really good players and three guys that are really good athletes but just know their roles, a guy that can handle the ball, a couple guys that can rebound and get the balls to the best players, because you're very rarely run up against a team with like 5 D1 guys.
Let's get into it though. So
right.
What position? Because that's tricky, because a center in high school basketball can be a high Division I player, but a little bit easier to slow down in a no shot clock, sagging, and I think if the best player,
unless your center's Fred Hoiberg, Nick Collison, Brandon Myers, guys
right.
like that.
But again, those guys had really good support too. I just think like the kid from Oskaloosa,
Foster.
If that's your best player, sometimes it's easier to slow that down versus if your best player is a point guard. Maybe I'm point guard biased, but I think that factors in.
Because in high school, the point guard has the ball so much, and they really do control.
If you're a big time center and you have a bad point guard, it's hard to get them the right looks. It's hard for them to dominate.
I guess to that point, when I say two really good players, like one of them's got to be a main ball handler.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Unless you have two like really premier other guys. But like you look at Rafe LaFrance or you look at Jordan Eagleseater's teams. Like, you know,
Charles City's team.
Charles City, Forest City,
Yeah.
like Garner. Like Garner had Wumkis and Stromer, right? And they had, Blake Nedved, cousin of mine, was on that squad. But, Blake, you just didn't have a lot of good guard play on that team. You had three running backs in the backcourt, and it just wasn't going to do the trick for Garner. They were like a poor man's Iowa Falls.
That's what I mean. I think, I think maybe we'll get into it, but Charles City had Greg Bruner and David Ridinghouse, 6'5", 6'7", 6'8", really good players that never made it to the state tournament. And I think it's easier to slow a team who has horses like that down if they don't have the right guard play to get him the ball.
Here's my point, though. Like Carroll Kemper, 85, I think it was, with Nick Nurse and David. So Nurse was the point guard and shooter, could handle the rock, could shoot it. David was the big guy that was Mr. Basketball. Like that, in my opinion, like that type of makeup is the perfect makeup in an Iowa high school team.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, we've beat around the bush too long. We got to get to the brackets. All right.
There's another guy really quickly too. There's a guy named Kerry Cohorn. Do you guys remember him?
Oh, Tri-Central Neola.
Yes. So like he must have been like late 90s too. Again, my era, I just remember that. And like he was a scorer, just flat out shooter.
He was all-time leading scorer for
until
a long
Brooks
time.
McCowan.
Until Brooks McCowan.
Oh, I didn't know. Yeah.
He scored like 2,600 points. He played in Nebraska.
Yeah. And I don't know if I think his team probably made it to state.
They did.
That's another.
All right, bracket. Here's my bracket. I'm going to say my top 8 teams, and then you guys go after this. And then we'll break down how we think it would shake out. All right? So I thought the top 4 teams were no-brainers for me, but everybody's going to have their own opinion. So my top 8 teams, number 1 seed, winning 54 straight games from 2008 to 2010, the Ames Cyclones. My number 2 seed, winning 52 straight games, 1998 to 1999. That win streak was snapped in the Gale Gymnasium, St. Edmund Gymnasium by Jack Brownlee, right there. Jack, remember breaking that game? Breaking that streak? Yep, I was there. Number 3 seed, 96-97, Mason City Mohawks. They're changing their nickname here, so might be canceled for that. 4 seed, Palmer. 103 in a row. I'm putting him in at the 4 seed because in my opinion, you cannot have a tournament to determine the greatest team in Iowa high school history without a team that won 103 straight games. So I'm putting the Palmer Panthers in at my 4 seed. My number 5 seed, this is where things got a little tricky. 2011 Linn-Mar. Marcus Page's senior year. Matt Bohannon was also a senior. I just thought that team was really good. And I think 2 really good guards. You have Page running the point, one of the best point guards the state's ever seen, with Bohannon, who never misses on the wings. And they're also like had a tradition really, really rolling. They knew how to win at that point. My 6 seed, 2021 Waukee. Maybe 4 D1 guys on that squad. 7 seed, Sioux City West, 1999, Kirk Heinrich. And my 8 seed, Iowa City West in 2013. So this was Wyatt Lowhouse and Jeremy Morgan. And I thought that was Iowa City West had it rolling, right? They had the McCaffrey brothers coming through. Jeremy Morgan, Wyatt Lowhouse. They are my 8 seed. My 9th seed that just missed the cut was Pella in 2003 with Clayton Corver and Pierce Hibma. So that's my 8. So I got Ames, Iowa Falls, Mason City, Palmer, Linn-Mar, Waukee, Sioux City West, Iowa City West.
Okay, ready for mine?
Any comments on mine, guys?
Well,
it's okay.
Initial thoughts?
Well, I mean, there were like multiple years you put in there. I thought it was supposed to be like one team. You gave you said Palmer from 86 to 89.
Okay. I'll clarify. Palmer in 88.
Okay. Ames was at 09
I'm going
or 10?
Ames in 10.
So, okay.
And I'm going Iowa Falls in 99. So I'm going both senior years for Collison, senior years for Barnes. I think that makes a big difference.
I think so too. So thanks for the clarification.
You're welcome, Sean. Jack?
So I am going with my number 1, Ames in 2009.
I think
Doug
this is a mistake.
McDermott and Harrison Barnes were juniors. My number 2 is Waukee 2021. 4 high major Division I players, one of whom is top 5 in his class. And
What Division I's Baloo playing at right now?
he's a junior.
Yeah.
He's
Just to
top
clarify,
5 in
he's
his
not playing high level Division I basketball yet.
top 5 in his class. He may not even play college. Might go anyway. My number 3 is Iowa City West 2013. Tim mentioned it. Jeremy Morgan.
Didn't they win it 3 years in a row too?
Wyatt Lowhouse, I believe so.
I think they were 12.
Yeah.
13.
They also had a guy, Dondre Alexander,
Yes.
who's supposed to go to Southern Miss out of high school. Some things happened. But they also had a guy, David DeLeo, on that team who was a really good player at Central Michigan. He still plays professionally. And then Austin Swank, who went to Kirkwood. So they had a pretty deep team.
Kirkwood has a basketball team?
Yeah, really good. One of the best powers in Division II JUCO. But anyway, then my 4th is Waterloo East, and my pick is from 2002 when they finished runner-up. I think they had the most talent on that team. We've talked about it, but I guess I talked about their roster already. But number 5 is Limar, like you said, 2011. Number 6 is Iowa Falls, 1998. So Collison and Lindeman's junior year, because Prentice Lofstedt, he needs to be in that mix if we're going to have a tournament of the best.
You think, I mean, I'll let you finish.
No, please.
You think that Linmar 2011 beats that Iowa Falls team?
I do. I think Linmar's guard heavy, and so you only touched on a couple. They had Marcus Page, obviously we know who that is. Matt Bohannon, a great player at UNI. They also had 6'6" Darius Stokes, went to Kirkwood, Iowa walk-on. They had Josh Montague, a 6'7" guy who was a D2 starter, and Shane Benton, who played at North Dakota. So they had a pretty deep team of college players, all 5. And I think if those two matched up, they'd have a hard time figuring out what to do with Marcus Page versus what they would do against Collison.
Okay. Proceed.
All right. So where am I at here? Okay, so number 7, 96, Mason City. Dean's junior year.
So not the year he put up 38.
No, his junior year, because of I think the 2 6'10" guys were a year older. Maybe one of them was.
Harriman was his same class.
Okay, so then the other 6'10" kid was a year older. So I think that was important in terms of depth. And then my 8th is Fort Dodge Senior High, 1988. Wow. Wade Lookingbill, Mr. Iowa. Basketball that year, went on to play at Iowa. Mark Carlson finished at Iowa State. Jay Goodman went to Iowa State and then went to Utah State and played some professional basketball.
Goodman had a great championship game.
Yeah, he had 36 in the state championship game. And they had Tim Mosley, I believe, who's a football athlete, Division I. So I think they had a lot of talent on that team, and that was kind of my first exposure to a really, really high-level high school team, and so they've got kind of a special place in my heart. So that's the top 8 for me.
I think you're underrating the Iowa Falls team.
You didn't have them in your top 8, Iowa Falls?
No, I had Iowa Falls at number 6.
Okay.
I think they're really good. I think it's...
And you had 98 Iowa Falls?
98 Iowa Falls.
So, question. You went with a lot of the junior years. You went with Ames junior year, Iowa Falls junior year, Mike Henderson, early. Like, you guys played high school basketball. How much better were you as a senior than as a junior?
A lot better, but of the teams I went with, those guys that were the core of juniors also had some seniors that were really good that weren't on that team when they were, like, for instance, Prentice Lofstedt was unbelievable. I think him leaving that team is a bigger difference than the improvement maybe Collison made from junior to senior year. Similar to
the Mason
Waterloo
City,
team.
wouldn't you take like the best version of Oliver and Harriman, because they're the 2 D1 basketball players?
But they also lost a big part of that team. So yeah, that's the conversation. It's you make a huge stride from junior to senior year. Most players do. But I'm looking at what team had the most talent, 1 to 5.
I think you weighed the team talent, like 1 through 5, more at least than I did, because I looked at those. Like I had the Ames 2010, I had Iowa Falls 99, because I more heavily weighted how good Barnes and McDermott were their senior year versus their junior year, and same with Collison.
Yeah, I can see that.
I'm the same way. I think,
but I
think like that Ames team, even though they had 4 D1 guys in 09, like Pritchard and Paulo were fine. Like Pritchard averaged 2 points a game during his career at Yale and went to prep school after Ames. Like, okay, he was okay. Paulo actually provided a lot of energy to that team. I really actually liked him as a high school basketball player. Thought McDermott made a huge leap after his junior year into his senior year. But I thought Barnes and McDermott were unbelievable as seniors. Like, once in a generation type Iowa high school basketball players. I thought McDermott was like a pretty good high school basketball player as a junior. I thought Barnes was really good. But like, I don't know. I would want them as seniors.
Well, I think Barnes was number 1 as a junior as well, wasn't he?
Yeah.
But way I look at it, what's bigger difference? Just having Paulo, is that how you say it?
Yeah.
On the team versus the improvement of McDermott from one year to the other. What's better for your team? And I think having another ball handler that's a Division I prospect makes that team better. McDermott did make a big stride from junior to senior year, but I think having a guy who's a Division I player in Pritchard and a guy who's a Division I player in Palo or whatever, I think that's, for me, that weighed more.
It's hard to argue. They won it both years, did not lose a game either year.
Right.
So it's a tough one.
Yeah.
I had Ames 2010 as my number 1.
All right. Sean, what's your bracket?
So Ames was number 1. It's similar to both of yours, but Ames number 1 for a lot of the same reasons we've talked about. Iowa Falls 99 was number 2. I mean, Collison and Lindemann both were first team All-State. They were both unbelievable. Collison, obviously is one of the top 5, I think, players in the state all time. My 3 was Sioux City West. I'm a huge Heinrich guy. I think he is one of the best, if not the best, to come out of the state. And then you paired him with this Slaven Markovic guy, and I remember I had never seen a European guy that was just a bulldog like that. And he was a D1 player. He was also first team All-State with Heinrich. And then there was a really young Ryan Galloway who's a good shooter. So I have them as my number 3. My number 4 is Waukee of 2021. I think when we look back in like another 20 years, that might be that could be the number 1. When you talk about 2 D1s to be, Tim wants us to be specific. Omaha's not D1 yet, but he's going to be. And then also the younger Sanford kid, who's still there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But there'll be 4.
He's like a sophomore.
Junior.
Is he just a junior now?
So there'll be 4 big time D1s if you called Tucker big time. But he's going to be a really good player.
Is Drake big time?
No, but he's going to be a really,
Oregon is, though, and then he turned Oregon down.
And I think Tucker will
I
be.
feel like that was kind of like
just a Dana Altman.
Altman knows the family and is going to send the thing out.
I don't think so. I think Dana Altman saw in Tucker how good he can be, and it's he can do something.
I agree, Sean. Though,
I'm just
10 years from now, we might be saying something different.
Omaha, this Omaha kid who should be a Dowling Maroon still, by the way. He might. Is he have a chance to go to jump to the pros?
I think so.
I've heard that his family wants to make that happen.
That would be.
That's what my sources are telling me.
Well, can you get your sources get in his ear to get him back to Dowling for next year? So that's my number 4. My number 5 was Mason City, 1996. So Dean, the Dean and the 2 big guys. My number 6 was Palmer from 88. I don't remember watching that. I didn't watch one single game. My number 7 is Des Moines Hoover. I've been very upfront on my Metro bias, but I think Dave Newman was an absolute stud. TJ Welton played D1. Greg Danielson played D1. They had a really good shooter. Last name was Rude. They just had a really good team, Jack. You would just like the team dynamic there. They got second place. They lost to Iowa City West by 1, but that was an unbelievable team. And then my number 8, I am heavy biased, Metro, is the Johnson Dragons of 1995. So I remember growing up watching Danner was an absolute stud point guard, not like a Heinrich Collison, like scorer. He was more of like a distributor. So like he was tons of fun to watch, but really athletic. And then Matt Sundblad was a D1 Lamar, I think that Sun Belt, and he was really good there. But Danner was second team All-State. Sundblad was first team All-State. They won the title back-to-back.
They won 58 in a row.
They won 58 in a row, yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. That team was really good. So those are my 8. And
So-
then, we didn't throw an honorable mention yet, did we?
No. Well, we kind of said some teams earlier, but who are your honorable
So
mentions?
my honorable mention were like the Des Moines Christian team that I mentioned. I think Oskaloosa with Foster and Cole Henry, who's at UNI right now playing some bigger minutes, and I think will continue to play big minutes. Iowa City West from 13. Yeah, some of the teams we mentioned.
So how do you think this plays out? Because maybe I'm biased, but like I think the big guys in high school basketball have more of an impact than a big guy at the college or pro level, just because on a high school team, you're just going to see a lot of runs. You're going to see a lot of like times where there are 5 guys collectively out of the 10 that are under 6 foot on the floor. Like you have that, right? And so like the 6'8" and the 6'9" guy like has a huge impact on some of these teams. And so that's why I have Iowa Falls as the 2 seed. I don't think their 1 through 5 are better, but I think having like an athletic Collison at 6'9", who's the best 6'9" guy the state of Iowa's ever seen, is like, I think that is worth like its weight in gold. And then, so I guess the way I'm thinking about this is Lindemann is 6'6" in high school. Eventually he's 6'7" at Creighton. And he can lock down the defender, or he can lock down the other team's best player, while Collison, does his thing down low. That's how I'm thinking about it. But then,
Did the Iowa Falls, did they have a guard that could get?
yeah, Jack, you know that roster better than
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah, I think partly why I have them at 6 is because I'm so sick of hearing about them talk about their success.
What do
I'm
they
friends
think?
with?
Yeah, you're friends with.
I'm
those
friends
guys.
with. I just went to Mexico with like 4 of them, and so maybe that's why I have them at 6. But they were really good. I mean, they had Mike Rolfs and Joey Liquay as their guards, and
Wasn't there a Brian Nail?
Brian Nail was a guard. Jason Reiber was a big off the bench. So they had a lot of guys that were good. And I agree that a good big guy can really affect the game in high school. Like Nick would have. Some guys, it's easy to put 3 guys around you and force like the guards to shoot and become shooters. It's easier to slow down a big guy if they're not if they don't have the right mentality. So I think Iowa Falls, if with Nick and Lindemann, they would be really tough.
Especially, they had their guards weren't the best basketball players in the world, but they were really athletic.
Very athletic.
And if you match them up against a Heinrich, right, they would pressure Heinrich all night long. And then after Heinrich gets by that guard, he's got to run into Lindemann and Collison. Mm-hmm. Like I just think at the high school game, the options are limited a lot of times. Yeah. Now that Waukee team, that's what made the Waukee team so tough.
Yeah,
they're all 6'6".
They were all
taller.
Yeah. I just thought the reason I put the Waukee team a little farther down was because Sandfort sophomore, Ballou sophomore, right? And so I was really looking at it as like DeVries and Peyton Sandfort were the 2 guys, because I really didn't think the younger Sandfort and Ballou were like, they were a lot of potential, but they weren't anywhere near what Dean Oliver, Kirk Heinrich, the Lindmar guys as seniors. I didn't think they were even close to that level yet.
Yeah, so I see where you're going. That's why for me, I had Iowa Falls and Sioux City West in my top 3. I had Waukee 4. Although to your point of Belu and the younger Sanford being young, they're still big. Like if Belu is a 5'11" guard, then I might think a little differently. But a 6'6" Baloo is still like he wasn't scoring a bunch last year last year because he didn't have to.
Yeah.
Like he's going to like he still was like a force to reckon with at 6'6" and just being really athletic and
So you put your brackets together, and we don't need to go through what every matchup would have looked like. But who do you think makes the final game?
And I wanted to point out too, we're kind of taking classes out of this, right? Like this is a no class. Like it's these 8, like if they matched up, who's winning, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the reason why I put Palmer 4 too was I think not only Palmer did they have 2 Division I guards, Troy Skinner and Brian Pearson, that are number 2 and number 4 all time in the state of Iowa and made 3-pointers back in the 80s. You know, like these guys were gunning, and they played a different style of basketball than anybody else. And so I just thought it would be great to see them try to play that style of basketball against one of these other teams.
It'd be fun to see that team play like a Waukee team who's all, you know, they don't really have a traditional point guard. So they're all 6'6", long kind of wing players. It'd be fun to see them try to chase those 2 around and try to get hands up on the
Who
on
wins that
threes.
game?
I mean, again, I don't know the other 3 on that team, and so I think the length wins that game.
Waukee,
I think
yeah.
Waukee does. I think it'd be really fun to watch.
I'm sure Fort Dodge 88 played Palmer 88. You know, there's 25 miles separating those teams. They all played AAU together. Yeah. So I'm sure like Skinner and Looking Bill, we could get them to tell us the story of the summer game that they played against one another. I would guess Fort Dodge might have edged him out, but like I bet Palmer made him work for it. And if Skinner and Pearson are hitting and both of them go for 30, like Palmer's winning.
Yeah.
Palmer's winning.
The way I look at it too is, again, this goes back to my argument about who the most talent on the team. I look at, like you said, who's got the best player, second best player. All these teams are going to have 1 or 2 really, really good players. It's the best 8 of all time. So I'm looking at what's maybe those top 2 on each team cancel each other out. Probably different positions, but they're both going to get off. What's the next 3 to 5 players on that team? What are their capabilities?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And so, you can look at Linmar with Marcus Page playing Mason City 96. Dean Oliver, Marcus Page. Let's just say they cancel each other out. What else does Linmar have versus what else does Mason City have? And I think Linmar has a lot of good players other than Marcus Page. So that's kind of how I was weighing things. Is I think, especially in high school, the best players are going to get off, both teams. What else do they have?
Yep.
What can they support?
So in my bracket, it comes down to Ames, Iowa Falls. Jack, who's your final?
I have Ames and Waukee.
Sean?
I have Ames and Sioux City West.
All right. So Ames is far and away the number 1 seed. I want to talk through every matchup. So we have Ames, Iowa Falls, we have Ames, Sioux City West, and we have Ames and Waukee. Let's talk about the Ames, Iowa Falls first. Okay? The way I see that game playing out is you have and I'm taking 09, I'm taking the 10 Ames team. So that lineup is Harrison Barnes averaging 27 a game. Harrison Barnes is senior average 26.9 points per game, 10.5 rebounds per game. Doug McDermott averaged 20.5 points per game, 7.8 rebounds. Then Paulo and Pritchard are not on that team.
Right.
They're already gone. So you got Michael Weber, who then went on to Kirkwood, was an All-American at Kirkwood, and then played at University of Missouri, St. Louis, I think, after that. You had James Kohler, who played baseball over at Evansville, and then you had Riley Stuvey, who played over at Indian Hills. All those guys averaged under 8 points a game. So against an Iowa Falls team with Collison, Lindemann, 3 athletic guys. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
Because I'm talking 99 Iowa Falls. So I'm
Yep.
taking Lofstead out of it because that's the team that I'm choosing, even though Lofstead, 6'5", athlete, played Division I baseball, had offers to play college basketball as well, but I'm taking that senior year. So I think the way I see it in my mind is that Lindemann's going to be matched up with Barnes, and that's a pretty good matchup. And then you got Collison against McDermott. And I think McDermott, or I think Collison, I think Nick Collison when he was a senior in high school is better. The margin between him and McDermott is greater than the margin between Barnes and Lindemann. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. So that's an interesting matchup. It's hard to for me to square that up because Collison was so dominant in 2A. It wasn't even there was nobody that even. So when you talk about,
they won the state championship game by 20.
Yeah. So who'd you have matching up against him? Who'd you just say?
I had Lindemann guarding Barnes.
Yep,
and Collison on McDermott.
And when you have McDermott guarding Collison, I just remember Collison being so dominant. And I kind of remember McDermott a little bit as a junior, which was timid. I know we're talking about his senior year now, but I don't think he's so good offensively, McDermott, but I don't think he's touching Collison on defense.
I don't think so either.
So
I think that's a tough matchup for Ames. I think it's a really tough matchup for Ames.
I think so too.
I think Harrison Barnes 6'8", Doug McDermott 6'7", James Kohler 6'7", is a combination that can at least slow that down.
That's going to cause a problem for Iowa Falls.
Yeah, I think they haven't seen that kind of length, and I still think Nick gets off, but I think I would guess that they'd probably put Kohler on Nick, a bigger body to kind of lean on because Nick's more inside, and probably Harrison on Lindemann, and then Doug's kind of free to kind of play that outlet of helping out, and if you can throw Doug and Kohler at Nick, I still think Nick does well, but that's tough to overcome.
So watching Harrison Barnes, I watched a couple of Harrison Barnes games today, and from this Ames team this year, and I watched him in person as a junior when he was a junior, and I remember thinking he's great, but I was a little surprised he's the number one guy, because you forget that I'm not a scout. I don't know what a great 15-year-old, 16-year-old is supposed to look like. Yeah. And then you watch him as a senior, and he was unbelievable. The things that he was doing on the court. I think Ames wins. I think Ames wins the game. But I think on the right day, I think Lindemann could give Barnes fits because I don't know if Barnes faced a guy like Lindemann. 6'6", rangy, left-handed. I think he's funky. I think those Iowa Falls guards were annoying. They were super athletes and annoying. And I think Collison was a better high school player than Barnes. Even though I think Barnes had more potential and reached higher points in his basketball career, but Collison was so good as a high school basketball player, as a freshman at Kansas, as a sophomore at Kansas. He was so far advanced skill-wise for a 6'9", 6'10" guy that Barnes never saw a guy like that in his high school career. Never. He did on the AAU circuit for sure, but in his high school career, never saw a guy like Collison, and I'm pretty certain of that.
I just think Ames had shooting, length. They had a good point guard, really good point guard for that system too, and I just think I think Iowa Falls is great, but Ames just had too many guns, just way too many.
All right, who's your matchup, Jack? Ames versus
I had in my final two, which was really close because I had Iowa City West in 13 and Waterloo East in 02 right there, but my final two would be Ames 09 versus Waukee 21. That's my championship.
So my only critique on Waukee 21, I watched some of their games and I don't know. I was a little underwhelmed at times.
I agree, but I think if you were 13 and you watched those games,
you're right.
It was going to hit just as much as maybe watching Dean Oliver play at Mason City. I think sometimes that clouds are the way we look at it. We're grown-ups now, and so we expect a little more, and I'm just looking at just the length, the ability, and the talent that Waukee had. I know they lost a game still.
I think if you look at the top four for Waukee, DeVries, the two Sanfords, and Belu against Ames top four, which is a junior Mcdermott and Barnes, senior Palu.
Yeah, we're talking about a different
09,
year here. Yeah.
And then a senior Pritchard. I think the Waukee team gives Ames fits. I don't know what your final is there.
Actually, now that you say that, I forget about that. I actually think Waukee beats them. Might beat that
It'd be
team.
it'd be a great
I think
matchup
it'd be
because
great.
of there's again the game has just progressed so much in terms of just the size of everybody. You were lucky to get a 6'6" kid on your team, period, when we were coming up. And now they're full of guards. And so the length is just so hard to deal with in high school. And that's why I think Ames and Waukee, they had so many skilled players with length. It's just hard to match up against.
08-09 Ames. Barnes averaged 19.7, 8.8 rebounds. Doug McDermott, 14.7 rebounds. Jesse Pritchard, 10 points, 3 rebounds. Paulo, 8 points, 4 assists. Michael Weber, 7 points, 3 assists. James Kohler, 5 points. Riley Stuve, 5 points.
And that's in basically three quarters because
Yeah, you're right.
they're just blowing teams out.
Do you have Waukee's numbers by chance of the top four for Waukee? I'd just be curious how they stack.
I'm gonna look them up real quick here.
I think for me, Waukee, why I didn't just love them when I watched was because they didn't have a traditional point guard that was like made the game look sexy. But when you had to play a team that's got four incredibly skilled guys with wingspans of 6'6" that can cover the whole floor, especially when you're out there playing, it looks like there's absolutely no room for anything. That I think those two teams are just a cut above everybody else.
We just didn't see that in our day.
Never.
4, 6'6", 6'8", just
No
athletic,
vision at
lanky.
all because of the length and the athleticism.
Yeah, that would be a great match. That would be a matchup that would be fun to watch. All right, while you're looking that up, I'm gonna go through mine because I want to hear you guys' take on why I have Ames 10.
Hold on, I got the stats.
Okay, let's hear
got the stats. All right. So Waukee, Tucker DeVries averaged 18.5 points, 6.6 rebounds, 5.6 assists, shot 43% from the three-point line, 53% from the field. Tucker DeVries had a good year. Peyton Sanford, 16.6 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, shot 45% from the three-point line. Omaha Ballou, 10 points, 7 boards, shot 65% from the field, 38% from the three-point line. Maybe I'm not giving Omaha enough credit.
He's only getting like 7 shots a game.
Price Sanford, 7 points a game, 50% from beyond the arc. You had Malik Allen, averaged another 7 points a game. These guys shot the ball well. They shot 40% from the three-point line last year. I think that team, I would not have said this a couple hours ago, but looking at these numbers and kind of talking through it, especially the junior Ames team, I think that team beats Ames. I think Waukee beats Harrison Barnes as a junior.
So I do too. I think you think that too, Jack? Or no?
No, I still think Ames wins that.
You think Ames 09 wins that? So then let me ask you, Tim. Do you think Waukee 21? How do they do against Ames 10? So now we're talking about
I think Ames wins that game because I think Barnes is
the leap that Barnes and McDermott both made. Yeah,
I mean McDermott was like coming off the bench for a lot of the time as a junior.
Yeah,
and he was just kind of another guy, and you're like, oh, that's Greg McDermott's son. And then as a senior, he was like he had grown up a lot, and I think it was a totally different team. We watched that year. Barnes, as a junior, came to St. Ed's gym over Thanksgiving and played the Gales.
Jumped over your cousin.
And jumped over John Flattery. And we were keeping score. Ames beat St. Ed's by 10. And Barnes was kind of sleepwalking through a lot of the game because he didn't really want to be there. And I remember Paulo was the guy. Like Paulo was the he stirred the drink, if you will. But I remember thinking at that time, Doug McDermott is a Missouri Valley guy. Like, that's what I remember thinking.
And he was the Missouri Valley Player of the Year.
Yeah. Well, he was turned into the Missouri Valley Conference, the guy in that conference.
Yeah.
Turned into like a Larry Bird. Okay, so yeah, I guess with Jack's matchup, Waukee versus Ames 09, I'm taking Waukee.
Likewise.
Sean?
I'm taking Waukee.
And I'm still taking Ames.
Sean, who's your matchup?
So I don't feel like I have much of a chance here because my matchup is Ames 10, which that team is unbelievable, as we just talked through. I have that against Sioux City West 99.
So give us the case for Sioux City West.
Just
99.
tell me who stops Kirk. And Slaven Markovic was a bad. I don't know if I'm saying that last name right, but he was a bad man. And I think he gives fits to Mcdermott. He fouls out in this, in the second quarter, Markovic probably, but I think he gives fits to Mcdermott because if I remember Mcdermott, correct me if I'm wrong, he played down low. Did he play down low in high school?
Yeah.
Is that where he was getting his buckets, like around the basket?
A lot of teams tried running like a lot of zones and stuff on Barnes to slow him down, and McDermott would just find the open spot.
Yeah.
He wasn't like that lockdown shooter he is in the NBA now.
Right.
Like,
so he was down low.
Yeah.
So I think Markovic is causing fits down there because he hasn't seen someone like that in the little Cyclone conference that they play up there. And then I don't know who's stopping Kirk. And I think Kirk
doesn't Barnes guard Kirk?
I hope Barnes guards Kirk.
He'd have to.
Kirk's going for 60.
Because if it's Michael Weber against Kirk Heinrich,
no, Barnes would. I think Barnes would. Yeah.
And I don't think Barnes. I guess they're both seniors in this world, but I just don't think Kirk Heinrich. And this is my revisionist history a little bit, but he was a god. He was the best player. Nobody could stop him. Bigger, stronger for a guard than anybody. Better handles, shoot. He did it all. While Barnes could guard him, I understand that might be the matchup. I don't think Barnes can stay in front of him. I don't think Barnes has the lateral quickness for Kirk. I think Kirk is so much of a problem that they win that game. I'm putting a lot on Kirk here.
Thinking about that matchup kind of gets me excited because you would know how this would be built. Harrison Barnes, number one player in the country, has to go up against Kansas point guard recruit.
And Kirk would be guarding
Kirk
Barnes
Heinrich
too.
And Kirk, who's one of the best defenders.
He would be guarding Harrison.
And it'd be a challenge for each. They would know about the challenge. They would know of each other. And it would be it would just be appointment viewing.
And it would only come down to can Kirk win the game? Can Captain Kirk win the game?
Captain Kirk.
That's what it would come down to. And if he doesn't score legit 40, then they don't win and they So
he always showed up for big games though. So that would be really fun to watch.
I think Galloway hits 4 threes that game as a sophomore because nobody knows who he is.
I agree.
And this Markovic cost fits for McDermott, kind of takes him out of the game. And I think Kirk goes for 40. Barnes has 18, which is his average. Probably less because Kirk locks him up a little bit.
Kirk was a great defender. I think he made a couple of all-NBA second-team defense, Jack.
Yep.
One of the all-time leaders behind Jordan and Pippen in Bulls steals. I think he's number 3 in steals.
Is he?
And who's more of a rip-your-throat-out guy, Kirk Heinrich or Harrison Barnes?
I don't know Harrison like that. I know Kirk is. Kirk's definitely like that.
Yeah. Harrison, his demeanor doesn't seem that way, but I don't want to just judge a book by its cover either.
Those guys too, I've talked about this before. Ames and Iowa Falls even, they were so good that they were never in any close games. So it was hard to see if they had that rip your throat out because they're so good. It was never this close back and forth. And Sioux City West had a lot of those. They won a lot of games, but they didn't blow every team out. So you could kind of see that kind of fight Kirk had. And Harrison they were so good. It was hard to see that until he got to college.
Yeah.
What's funny about that, a lot of times at the state tournament, these teams that haven't lost or haven't really been tested all year, all of a sudden are they're down, right? They're down. They have a cold shooting night at the barn because they're not used to shooting in this environment, right? They've never played in a gym like this before. And you're not so much worried about the Barnes, Collison, Heinrich Jess Settles. You're not worried about those guys. Yeah. You're worried about the running back that's playing point guard for you, that's panicking, that has to bring the ball up the court and break the press. That's why I think the Palmer team would actually do well, is because like they would cause guys like, who are the 4 Division I guys at Waukee? Well, who's the 5th guy?
Yeah.
Because that guy probably has to handle the ball, and he's going to have 5 turnovers. And those are going to turn over into 5 threes for Brian Pearson.
Yeah.
You know?
And though, to that point, though, that's why I like having a really good point guard, and not just a really good point guard, but the best point guard ever to come out of Iowa on my team, because he's going to control the ball for the majority of the game. Going back to Ames, I don't know who their point guard is in that 10.
Michael Weber.
Michael Weber. Yeah, is he the running back that is?
No, he actually ended up being an All-American at Kirkwood.
Oh, okay.
So he was pretty good.
Okay.
But he's little. He's my size.
Yeah, okay.
So, jacked, but
yeah, but you're right. I think that you get a lot of those guys that are not basketball players in that big moment, and they could get frazzled. I do like having really good point guards, and if you look at my whole list, whether it was Heinrich or Newman or Danner, or I even like Ryan Sears, I liked.
With no shot clock, you get up 5 or 6 in the 4th. If you have good guards, you can theoretically just hold it and win. If you have really good point guards, that can handle it. So that's an advantage for sure.
Thank God the shot clock's coming.
Yeah, does this tournament take place in the shot clock era? Does this tournament take place in the shot clock era?
When is the shot clock coming, by the way?
Is it this year?
It's
coming.
Yeah, so it's not this year that we're in right now.
Yeah.
Right? But maybe it's 22?
I would say since it hasn't been here yet, this tournament takes place outside of a shot clock era.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This tournament we're talking about now is outside of the shot clock. But it would beg an interesting question on if there were a shot clock, does that change any of the opinions so far? Let's not go down that road, but
yeah, I think ultimately the tournament comes down to 3 or 4 teams.
Not to backtrack entirely, but just really quickly, because a team I had on my list that we have not talked about, and I don't think a lot or at all, is the 07-08 Iowa City High with Matt Gatens.
Yeah.
And John Licklider, and I know nobody likes John Licklider, but John Licklider was a Division I basketball player.
Hey, he had a moment.
And they had A.J. Derby, who's I think was in the NFL at some point, and a guy named Malcolm Moore, who I believe played Division I basketball as well. I don't know a lot about that team, if they won it or not.
I mentioned him earlier.
You did? Okay.
They weren't one of my first cuts, but the Matt Gatens Iowa City High team in 08 was on my honorable mention list.
I just, because I wanted to give, shout out to John Licklider as well on that squad.
What's funny about that is John Licklider's a punchline, but you're right. Like, he was a Division I basketball player. Like, we're giving some of these guys credit as the 4th guy on some team that, played at Nyack or whatever. But, Licklider was better than that guy. Yeah.
They were in the top 8, though, for any of us. Okay.
And Gatens was really good.
Right. I just was acknowledging we didn't talk much about the 07-08, like Gatens, Licklider, AJ Derby, and
they had another guy, a big
Malcolm
guy.
Moore, who played
Malcolm Moore.
Yeah, so that was, they weren't in any of our top 8s, but I just wanted to make sure that we gave them due.
Well, yeah, if you do a tournament like this, you'd almost want to make sure you had representation. Like, hey, let's put the best Hall Western Christian team in. Let's put the best Pella team in.
Yeah.
Let's put the best, Paulina team in. Paulina at one point won 80.
I loves Paulina.
Have you looked at Neil Fegabank won 80 in a row, and then you had Randy Crimebrink come in after that.
The Moonlight research team is significantly better than the O'Hare research team.
I'm just saying, you can't tell the story of Iowa high school basketball without Paulina. You really can't. As much as CIML Sean over here wants to talk about every Hoover team ever, I'm sorry, Paulina was better. But yeah, Winfield Mount Union with Edwards and Settles. If Jess Settles doesn't hurt his back in college, and Jess Settles goes on to play 3 years in the NBA, right, which was the track he was on after his sophomore year of Iowa, we're probably slipping Winfield Mount Union in here too, just because we would remember Jess Settles a little bit differently.
Goes on to Sean and I's point. You have to have your best player has to be the point guard. Versus you have really good big guys, it's easier to slow them down.
Yeah.
than it is to slow down a really good point guard.
Because you have Settles and Edwards. I'd love to see what their guards were like. I'm sure they had some decent players, but yeah, you need good guard play, especially without a shot clock.
Exactly. At the very least, you have to have guards that can get the big guy the ball. Just that's it. And some teams, some big guys don't have that luxury. It's funny. You know, I played with guys in high school and college who didn't have as big of stats as you would think, and it's because they just, you know, had a hard time getting the ball.
Right. And, you know, obviously we're not able to research every team here. I wonder about that Applington team that won 75 in a row in 91, 92. Like, I'm just taking a guess that
Probably a DeVries on that team.
like Dusty DeVries was on that team. I'm just making up stuff right now, but I'm guessing, was it Dusty DeVries that played at Creighton or Drake? One of them.
Yeah.
One of them gave Iowa State some fits one year, and then Aaron Campman was probably like, you know, running the stretch for, not even stretch for. He was just banging down low and getting 11.2 rebounds per game on that team. I'm sure they were good, but like I said earlier, as much as I want the little schools to do well, when you look at the like 3 Division I guys from some of these teams, I mean, the Waterloo West team in '86 with Chris Gaines and Terry Woods and those guys is like a legendary Iowa high school team, but they didn't win it. Got to be by Kemper.
What was that? The Nick Nurse Kemper?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's understandable. Nick Nurse and Davis. That was a pretty good squad.
David.
Brian David.
Yeah.
Oh,
Paulina.
was he in the CIML?
He was not in the CIML.
I think we've been lucky, though, man. There's been a lot of really good players. And the state tournaments, for me, is I don't go to it as much as I used to, but it's, you know, I make sure to watch on TV as much as I can because it's. I think I was per capita. I haven't seen stats or anything like that, but we've got a lot of really good players in this state that we're lucky to watch each year.
Guys we didn't mention. Jeff Horner.
Yeah.
Jeff Horner, one of the best Iowa high school basketball players ever. That guy was amazing as a high school basketball player. Greg Bruner. Haven't mentioned him. Adam Haluska. You know, haven't mentioned him yet.
Bobby Hansen.
Bobby Hansen, greatest Dowling team ever, 1979. The most recent Dowling state title. Can we get some?
It's coming. It's coming.
What other guys have we not mentioned? Anybody else out of the state that we haven't? Like Rafe LaFrenz, Lauren Meyer.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit before we went on, but 2010 state tournament alone in 4A showcased Doug McDermott, Harrison Barnes, Josh Oglesby went to Iowa, Wes Washburn went to UNI, Jared Utoff went to Iowa, Adam Woodbury, Marcus Page. That was just in the 4A class. And, you know, everybody I just mentioned in that list played professionally somewhere, NBA or overseas or the G League. So, you know, incredible. That's an incredible field for Iowa. And like I said earlier, it's just we're lucky to be able to watch these guys.
Who's the next Iowa NBA player?
So the obvious answer feels like Omaha.
High school player?
Yeah, I mean, just
Omaha.
Before
AJ Green's got a, you know.
I guess Wieskamps made his debut, right?
Yeah, Garza's played a little bit this year.
Garza's not an Iowan.
Oh, that's sorry. Yeah.
AJ Green.
I like AJ Green.
2 years ago, I thought AJ Green would have been a slam dunk, and now, like, I don't know. Like, the hip stuff, that doesn't go away.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
Bo Jackson. For those of us that grew up around Bo Jackson, we know that. Well, guys, anything else we need to add? Did that cover it? The greatest team in Iowa high school history.
Did we settle it? Is it Ames 10 or 9?
Oh,
or do it Sioux City West? Do I get a Sioux City West in there?
yeah. I would, Jack, I guess maybe that's the final argument here.
Oh, let's do it. Ames 09 versus Ames 2010. You guys have 2010 because I get why I get that. McDermott made a huge stride. And I've laid out my argument why I think the other guys that were seniors on that team were so good that It's really hard to match up with.
So the tiebreaker, Sean, I think it's 10.
I was on 10 a little bit too. I think you made some really good points, for like
Jack.
the team. I give the nod. I think I give the nod to 10. I do give the nod to 10 because of how good, specifically the stride that McDermott made.
Who was on that? Who were seniors on the 09 team? Was it Boo Boo Palo and
Pritchard and Paulo.
So 2 Division I players.
Yep.
So they lost those 2, and you think the stride that McDermott and Barnes made makes up for the losing 2 Division I players the year before?
That's the question.
So like once again, like Boo Boo went to Iowa State and rode the pine for a while before like eventually playing.
Yeah.
And eventually turned into a really good player, had a really nice G League career actually. But then you're substituting him with Michael Weber, who was a JUCO All-American. So like riding the pine at Iowa State or being a JUCO All-American, I think is like the same thing. It's really close. I think I don't think you're losing.
What
a lot.
about having both of them? You'd have both of them in 09.
Yeah, like they're. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough. I think the biggest difference is McDermott. I think he went from mid-major talent to high-major talent in that year.
Yeah,
and like I know sometimes we just make a blanket statement like, "Oh, this guy was a Division I player," but is being a Division I player, like Jesse Pritchard, after going to a year of prep school and then going to Yale and averaging 1.8 points per game at Yale, like that's a little bit of a Division I. Like that's a little bit different than like what Doug McDermott did. You know what I mean? Like, what's Yale? Are they? They're hardly division. They're like their own thing.
yeah.
It's like playing at Northwest Missouri State. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
good D2s are better than Yale.
I give more weight to the greatness of McDermott and Barnes, who were. I mean, are they going to go down as? Are they going down as 2 of the top? Are they 2 top 5? I mean, Barnes is definitely in top 5. Maybe number 1.
Iowa history?
Yeah,
We've already done that.
Yeah.
Oh, did you guys
Let's
do
go
that?
back to.
Is
I had McDermott in like 8 maybe.
so 2
or
in the
9.
top 10.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and you don't have McDermott in there in 09, right?
Yeah.
Like not after that year. So 2 of the top 10.
McDermott in 09 was like, hey, that guy could start for St. Ed's.
He was much better than that.
Right. So
I'm kidding.
are we calling it Ames 10 or are you gonna?
I mean, I think it'll be close. I could go either way. I originally picked 09. But yeah, I think the 09 team's deeper, but 2010 more talented. So it's talent or deep? Depth?
Ames 2010
Let's do it.
is the greatest
Holy
team in
cow.
Iowa high school history.
Congratulations, Ames 2010.
Wow, that was fun. Do we want to go back to revisit Sioux City West at all? You didn't tell me who was going to stop Heinrich, but
Well, what's funny is we're going to get a bunch of people like, you never saw Heelan in 93 play.
That's why we do it.
Yeah, I know. And sorry, Cordell Pemsel. I'm just watching you at Virginia Tech ruin my opinion of you. All right, thanks for listening.
Oh, we're still on.
Thank you for listening to today's episode about the greatest Iowa high school boys basketball teams ever. And if you got a connection to Kevin Costner that you're holding out on me, please reach out now because the well is dry on the Costner quest right now. The well is dry and I need some help. So if you got a connection to Costner, let me know. The other thing that we're doing here on the podcast for the remainder of this year, we are sending out shirts to everybody who wants them. We are in the spirit of giving here in this Christmas season, and we want all of our fans out there, the Moonlight Graham Show fans, to be rocking Moonlight Graham Show shirts. So while supplies last, DM me or send me an email, your size of shirt that you want. We'll send you out a shirt. If you want, it is a free will donation. You can Venmo me money. You don't have to, but you can Venmo me money. Had a ton of people last week take advantage of this. We'll be sending out those shirts here this week. So if you messaged us last week, we'll be sending out that shirt here this week. But for the rest of this year, If you want a Moonlight Graham Show shirt, send me your size. If we still have those sizes available, I will send you out a shirt. Free will donation. Really, we just want our best fans rocking our Moonlight Graham Show gear. So let us know if you want a Moonlight Graham Show shirt. We will make sure to get one out to you. Special thanks to the Moonlight Graham Show team. Brothers Andy and Neil, trusted co-host Tommy Griffin, the producer Brian Sandvik, and the artist Brendan Gargano, and of course, People's Company, the best sponsor in the game. Thank you guys for listening as well. Have a great week, Moonlighters.
It's Moonlight Graham, yeah. It's a pretty good program, broadcasting to the heartland. Sports stories for the everyman. It's Moonlight Graham, yeah. Please follow us on Instagram. You're loving us on Twitter too. You download every pod we do. It's Moonlight Graham.